Good evening, Erev Tov. One of the most empowering moments I had this past summer was getting up early in my hotel room, slipping on my talit and laning my tefillin and davening the morning service in Munich, Germany. For so long, Germany has been synonymous with the Holocaust, and now I was there and praying as an observant Jew generations later. But let me back up for a minute. Many of you know that my family and I spent some time in Germany and Austria this past August. It wasn't my choice of vacation spots, but I will say it was a lovely vacation, and of course we visited all the Jewish sites, or what remains of the Jewish sites, as we do every time we travel. We had a wonderful tour guide at Munich. His name was Gerhard, although he told us to call him Ger. And he gave us a historical tour of the beginnings of what would become the Third Reich amidst the beer halls of the city where Hitler, Yamach Shemo, may his name be erased, got his start as an orator and a nationalist leader. He told us at the conclusion of the tour that his father had served during World War II and had never spoken about his experiences during the war. But he added, matter-of-factly, I think he was probably a Nazi. We spoke a little more at length. He knew we were Jewish and even what I did for a living. And he told us, look, I get what's going on with Israel. Hamas attacked you. You're fighting back. But my daughter, her generation, I'm not so sure she sees things that way. And then he added, when I was a kid in school back in the 50s, they taught us that we Germans lost the war. There was this responsibility we all felt for it. But my daughter's generation was taught something different. They were taught that the Allies freed the German people from the Nazis. Now, I want you to think about that, because it's a very different mindset. It almost absolves that next generation. And remember what happens when you forget your past. Nazi Germany wasn't just some bad dream, a blip, an aberration. The Nazi Party was democratically elected to power. Now, I will say I felt safer in Germany than any other European country I'd traveled to recently. And thank God the government takes its responsibility to combat anti-Semitism and even anti-Israel and anti-Zionism seriously. I wish more countries in Western Europe followed Germany's lead. I can tell you that to me it feels like a true case of tshuva, of repentance. Back in the 1950s, when the issue of Germany paying reparations to the Israeli government came up, there were actual physical riots in the Knesset and protests that turned violent, with many politicians and people insisting it was blood money and we should never accept a single dime, even though the fledgling state desperately needed the money. For good reason, the suspicions ran deep, for decades and generations. I was one of those kids who was raised back to never buy German products. My parents never owned a Mercedes or BMW. I feel differently now. I think Germany is one of the few friends that Israel has left in the world, but the price for being Jewish is eternal vigilance. And while we have to find our friends wherever we can, we must never grow too complacent, even in this country. That's why Israel should be so important to so many Jews. That is why Israel is necessary to so many Jews. One of the many stories to have come out of that horrible autumn day nearly 2 years ago, I only heard about recently from a colleague. There was a man named Ramon who was an ambulance driver and had been assigned to be on call at the Nova Music Festival should anyone require first aid treatment, as is wont to happen when you have young people at an outdoor concert in the desert ingesting and imbibing God knows what. When the rockets started being fired over from Gaza, everyone mistakenly thought it was just a standard barrage, but things quickly grew tragic as terrorists started to pour in on motorbikes, pickup trucks, and paragliders, firing automatic weapons and killing people on sight. Ramon gathered as many concert goers as he could into his ambulance, drove them to safety, and then went back an additional 7 times, being shot at multiple times and saving as many young lives as he could. At one point, he called his wife to tell her what was happening, and she screamed at him, "You need to come home. You have a family." And he replied, "I know, but I have only one country." Ramon was a Bedouin Arab. When he was asked later what it felt like to be running up against his fellow Muslims who were shooting at him, he simply replied, "Those people weren't my people. They weren't Muslims." Over 300 people were murdered at the Nova Music Festival, mostly young people who only came to dance and celebrate. They weren't settlers or soldiers. They weren't politicians, just regular people. Most of them likely wanted to live in peace with their neighbors, and thanks to the act of Ramon and others like him, there weren't an additional 300 more. We have to remember the importance of Israel. We can never, ever take it for granted. America may be our adopted homeland, but Israel is our eternal homeland. And while we have to make sure we don't ever take our friends and allies for granted, we have to remember who is our family. We only have one homeland. Speaking of our friends and righteous Gentiles, Douglas Murray wrote in his recent book on democracies and death cults, which I highly recommend purchasing, "There is always a type of Westerner who is desperate to see the land soaked with blood as long as it is not their own. There are people out there that are irrational in their hatred of the Jewish state, and yet others who go out of their way to support those same people, all the while thinking that they employ liberal and progressive values. There are still others with their hatred of Judaism and the Jewish people who think that any defense of the one Jewish state is counterintuitive and part of some kind of conspiracy. There's no question that we live in dark times, but so did we live in dark times during the Crusades, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and of course the Holocaust. One could logically argue that we have known far scarier times than these. It's a catch-22 because when we appear weak, we are victims. And when we appear too strong, we are vilified. And all because we seemingly gave the world the gift of monotheism, the gift that apparently keeps on giving. And in some ways, 10-7 has been the gift that keeps on giving. For a few fleeting brief weeks, nearly 2 years ago, we had most of the world's sympathy and support when we were so viciously attacked. But once we responded and fought back, that support quickly started to erode. And now we stand virtually alone. And the world judges us for conduit that, while admittedly is far from perfect, it's just as likely any other nation on earth would be undertaking it, where God forbid they were to find themselves under similar circumstances. I get a lot of pushback from friends, from family, from colleagues, and even some congregants who feel I'm too one-sided on this issue. And it being Yom Kippur, let me admit something to you. I get it. I understand. But I'm not going to stand on this beam right now and criticize Israel, for better or for worse. First off, I think Israel gets enough criticism from the rest of the world, often to the benefit of our enemies and other far more brutal regimes out there. Secondly, I don't want any of you to get the wrong impression and think that your rabbi doesn't support the only Jewish state in the world and our one true homeland throughout history. Chas v'shalom, heaven forbid. Finally, and admittedly, most of you know how much the hostages mean to me and how much it breaks my heart that they are still being held in darkness. I knew one of them personally, and the bandwidth of my mercy can only extend so far right now. My heart only has so much room in it. I know it's never pleasant to fast, to go without food and water for a full 25 hours. That is why Jewish tradition only requires it twice a year. But think of our hostages, the 20 that we hope and pray are still alive, what they must be going through, how much food and water they have had to go without, how often they have had to fast. Some who have returned spoke of their captors gorging themselves right in front of them. Former hostage Mia Shem told of a mother bringing her little boy to stand in front of Mia after she had gone without food and water for a day. And at the mom's instruction, the little boy opened a bag of candy, held it up to Mia, and then very quickly pulled it away and laughed. Try to imagine what it must be like to be a hostage in the tunnels of Gaza, where you can barely breathe, and the heat and moisture keeps you from sleeping. This Yom Kippur, don't just pray for yourself. I'm asking you to pray for them. Pray for their freedom. Finally, after too long, agonizing years. And we pray in the grace after meals, Me'afela la'ora. Pray that they finally go from darkness to light this new year, and that their families may finally know closure and peace of mind. The sages tell us that if just one letter out of several 100,000 is missing in a Sefer Torah, it's unfit for use. So we are not truly free this new year from the trauma of 10/7 until all remaining hostages are finally brought back to us. Now, before I close out this sermon, I want to state something. I'm not of the belief that we have the state of Israel today because of the Holocaust and what happened 80 years ago under Nazi Germany. First off, I don't think you can create any moral equivalency for the 6 million lives that were taken from us. Secondly, I think Israel was well on its way to becoming an established fact well before 1948. There was the Peel Commission of 1937 and the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Not to mention of our ancestral homeland going back nearly 4,000 years, and there has always been a continuous Jewish presence there. I do think that after the devastation of the Holocaust, had the Jews, God forbid, been defeated in 1948 during their War of Independence, as many predicted they would have been, and either all killed or swept out of their homeland through forced exile, I think that the Judaism we know today, even in America, would be that much weaker and likely smaller. We needed the Jewish state to ground us and rebound us, and for the rest of the world to take us as a force to be reckoned with. We as Jews living in the diaspora had a reason to finally hope and look forward to the future. A future with a home. A future where we would no longer be just guests. A future we could truly be Am Yisrael Chai, a living, breathing, thriving nation. One last thing I want to mention as a point of pride. When we were in Munich a few months ago, where Nazism was conceived, we saw several flags flying at the Marienplatz, the Munich town hall. The German flag, the EU flag, the flag for the city of Munich, and we also saw the blue and white Magen David, the Israeli flag, proof and pride of our Jewish homeland. Imagine that. If we can accomplish a feat like that after the Holocaust, who knows what isn't possible for us as a people? Who knows what isn't possible for us this year? Gamar Chatima Tova. Have a full and good close to the year and an easy fast. And remember, this year, above all, you're not just fasting for yourselves. I'd like to ask everyone now to please rise as we conclude services with Aleinu, page 240.